5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I fought it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely.
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say
6,
6, 5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, podcast fans. You have found your way to episode 85 of Rank and Review, and I am your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons. And this episode, my friend Eric Jurgens and I are going to discuss 6 films on the subject of historic horror. And we haven't talked about historic horror since episode 1, so the nostalgia train just keeps on running. As usual, when you're listening to Rank and Review, you can expect spoilers for the movies being discussed, and you can also expect coarse language. Please seek out the show on iTunes, seek it out on Facebook, and check out the website at rankandreview.ca. And if you had any feedback for me, I would welcome it. You can send me anything that you have in your brain at rankandreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. Now, let's get historic. Okay, so here we are sitting down for the 85th episode of Rank and Review with my returning guest, Eric Jurgens. Your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, is mostly here. I'm pretty awake. I got some tea going. I'm brewing it up. But thank you so much for coming back.
Not a problem.
You selected this list, Historic Horrors, and this is the second episode that we're doing Historic Horrors, the first one being episode number 1. So I'm curious, was there a title in the list that jumped out? Was there a reason that you selected this theme? What was it that made you choose this bunch of movies?
It was, I'll be honest, I recognize, like, 2 of the covers have actors that I recognize, and then the other movie was Crimson Peak.
Right.
And there was kind of like this 1, 2, 3 in my brain of like, oh, Kurt Russell, Lena Headey, Crimson Peak. All right, this is like familiar and interesting enough for me to kind of lock onto. Not that there was a couple other things in the list he gave me where I was like, ooh, I'd almost do that. But I wanted to do a more traditional Rank and Review episode after our
Batman, Spider-Man debate.
Yeah. Exactly. And on top of that, like I said, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, this feels comfortable and good.
Okay, so you hadn't seen most of the movies then?
I'd only seen 2 of them. Yeah, that's a true fact. Only 2 of them.
Well, that's nice. So this will be sort of a fresh start for you. Usually when you're looking with all these disparate movies, and I tried to sort of mix them up as far as budget and period of time.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're going to get. It's kind of like a surprise bag. But I think it's more fun in the podcast if you come in blind. Hopefully you're not going to walk away angry with me. I think overall, we've got a good list here.
Mm-hmm. Overall, yeah.
So, is there anything specific about doing genre horror movies that are set to a specific time period? Is there like your dream horror movie? Do you need that zombie western, or do you want the Mountains of Madness to be made?
I feel like the best zombie western's already been made in the form of a game called Red Dead Undead Nightmare. But
right.
No, I think the other thing about historic horror is that whenever you double up on genres, you kind of have two things to latch onto. I'm actually historically, I didn't mean to say that. I'm actually not really a huge horror fan, just because in general, I find for all like the good either masterpieces or classics, like the Dawn of the Deads or the Friday the 13th, you get a lot of movies that think they're going to be those and try too hard. And that's been kind of my experience with horrors in the past, is like just, a try-hard genre, I guess is what I call it. Or it gets very generic very quickly. Whereas with historic horror, even that little bit of like spice to the recipe of also we need to make it a historic movie,
right.
It can't just be scary, is enough to, I think, breed some creativity.
Well, my knee-jerk reaction, and this is funny coming from somebody who loves movies as much as I do, is that I think most genres are flooded with mediocrity, but for some reason horror gets called out on it. But if I'm honest, for every really great comedy I see, there's a bunch that make me roll my eyes, right? For every truly great romantic comedy, there's a bunch that I
both
just...
truly great romantic comedies, there's all the other ones.
Yeah, I'm trying to find one idea. Generally speaking, there's a million action movies, but there's a handful of really, really good ones.
Yeah, the good ones kind of bubble to the top, whereas with horror, you're right. I don't know what it is, but it feels like for some reason they present themselves as, or maybe not they present themselves, but the zeitgeist is such that they're more a dime a dozen than other genres, even though we're going through comic book fatigue right now. But
there's like the horror genre does have a little bit of stink on it still. I mean, it's not typically horror movies don't win Oscars, and typically horror movies that want to tell stories in these sort of periods of a real uphill battle. I've mentioned on the podcast before, Guillermo del Toro, who we're going to talk about, has been trying to make The Mountains of Madness, this H.P. Lovecraft movie, for years and years and years. And you would think, like at one point they had Tom Cruise attached. They were going to use the production team that James Cameron used for the Avatar technology to render these Cthulhu creatures, these Lovecraftian monsters.
They should have got the Davy Jones people from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Well, anybody they need.
Yeah, they had Cruise attached is the point.
James Cameron, Tom Cruise, and Guillermo del Toro could not get that movie made. And if those three guys can't get a historic horror movie made with a hard R for a Main Street audience, it's like, well, who the fuck can, right? So a lot of the movies we're going to talk about today are low budget. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And I will sort of confess my personal bias that I will cheer for a production that is that ambitious. I know firsthand how difficult it is to make a low budget movie. And short of doing science fiction, doing a historic piece, like every single piece of frame in your film will have to be augmented and have to be, in some way adapted to the period. And if you don't do it convincingly for every shot, the entire illusion falls apart. So, uphill battle with the historic setting, uphill battle with the genre itself. I have a soft spot for these movies. So, again, they might start a little bit ahead of the line for me, but I look forward to talking about them. Is there anything else you want to say by way of introduction before I talk about these movies and we review the sons of bitches?
I'm ready to jump in.
Let's do it. The movies that we are going to review in some kind of order, we haven't decided yet. We have Crimson Peak from Guillermo del Toro. We have a really brutal western starring Kurt Russell called Bone Tomahawk. Lena Headey stars in The Black Plague. We have one of the oldest known stories in written language in Beowulf and Grendel. We have Death Watch, one of the very few movies that is set during World War I. We see a lot of movies set during World War II, almost none during World War I. And then we have a New Zealand film called The Devil's Rock.
Set in World War II.
Set in World War II, speak of the devil, with some Nazis experimenting with satanic shenanigans. 1, 2, 3, go. Let's do it.
There are parts of the house that are unsafe.
What was that? A house as old as this one becomes, in time, a living thing. Never go below this level. Let's start God's holding on to things.
Has anyone died in this house? Specific deaths, violent deaths.
In your own best interest, proceed with caution.
Keeping them alive when they shouldn't be.
If you're here with me, give me a signal.
She knows everything.
Do we have to do this? Must we?
Yes. You have no idea what they do.
What do you want?
So, our mutual acquaintance, Ashley, and I reviewed Pan's Labyrinth the first time she was on the show, and we both pretty much gushed about it. I might have liked it slightly more than she did, because somehow it didn't make the top of her list. But hey, Po Buddy's nerfect, so...
I have to go give her heck about that when I get home.
Exactly. But I am a fan of this director, and I've reviewed a lot of classic form ghost stories, which one could argue this definitely is. But I think when I come into a movie with a director that I love, particularly, I think in a way it works both for and against the movie. It works for the movie in that I'm really excited and I want to see this new Del Toro joint. But it works against me in that I have a certain level of expectation. When I reviewed Pacific Rim, which was the movie he directed previous to this, I was basically like, it was pretty good, I guess, but I mean, from Guillermo? Guillermo, I set the bar a little bit higher. And not as extremely as I did with Pacific Rim, I kind of have a similar reaction to Crimson Peak. So I will put that to you. We should cover the plot at some point, but broad strokes.
I think
where
you did.
are you?
They're ghosts.
There's ghosts. Yes.
Broad strokes, you've almost echoed my feelings entirely. I'm a huge fan of Pan's Labyrinth. It's not a movie that I can watch every weekend for obvious reasons. It's
Schindler's List
heavy.
of
Yeah, no,
fantasies.
100%.
Yeah.
And then for Rock'em Sock'em Robots versus Godzilla's, I enjoy that movie. I don't have anything particularly against it, but it's not like a lot of my friends they'll treat it like it's the John Wick of action movies, and it's not. John Wick is the John Wick of action movies. It's a solid film. It doesn't necessarily get me excited. I had a lot of expectations for Crimson Peak. Maybe not high expectations, but a lot of them, because actually I played the, I guess, precursor to Crimson Peak, which was a demo of a game called PT that Guillermo del Toro made with video game auteur Hideo Kojima. And what it was this like hour-long horror game, which was a kind of trailer. This literally stands for playable trailer for a Silent Hill game that they were both working on, which got crushed when Konami decided that it would rather make money than games. It was very sad. I was excited for Silent Hills, as it was to be titled. But PT is one of the most fantastic pieces of media I've consumed. It like really plays with the medium and the style and the horror genre in a game in a way that I haven't seen before. So when I heard that Guillermo del Toro was taking out his creative maybe frustrations out and making a movie, I was like, yes, PT the movie.
Yeah.
And Crimson Peak is not that. It's I guess, yeah, let's go over the plot of it.
Very romantic framework, typically set. Mia Wasikowski, I think that's how you say that name.
I'll trust you before I'll trust me trying to say it.
She played Alice in the nouveau version of Alice in Wonderland, the Tim Burton one. I thought she was fine there. I think that she might be a little bit outclassed by some of the people around her in this movie. And that's not to say that she sucks, but I think Jessica Chastain probably gives the performance of the movie for me, as far as, you know, her strong, sustained sort of menace. You know there's something up with her before anything, the worm turns with her. Like,
yeah.
It's not necessarily a mustache-twirling villain type of person.
If she had a mustache, she'd probably twirl it.
But you can definitely tell that she's unhappy a lot of the time, and she doesn't hide it well.
None of her smiles feel like they're happy.
Yeah. She has no poker face, and she doesn't seem to care that she doesn't have a poker face. And that kind of works against it, because her and her brother/lover, as we find out later, played by Loki from Marvel. That's his name, right? Loki?
Yeah, Loki.
I just blanked on the dude's name.
Tom Hiddleston.
Hiddleston, thank you. in order to maintain their bizarre lifestyle, they have got their hands pretty bloody. Chastain, most specifically, with the murder of the matriarch of the family, but both of them have been luring, young, wealthy inheritance people to their place to kill them and take their money, essentially.
Yeah. Well,
and Mia Wasikowska is sort of the next up in that line.
Yeah, the key step is Loki Hiddleston marries them, and then they die, then he gets their money.
Their wealth.
Yeah, and they've done that a suspicious amount of times, and no one's wondered what's up. They also go quite far abroad to accomplish this. They own the titular Crimson Peak way out in the UK, and in the beginning of this movie, it actually takes place in
New York.
Somewhere old-timey America. Going back to what we were saying before, this movie kind of feels flat to me. There a lot of, not in a actively negative way, but just not in an exciting way. It's weird having Tom Hiddleston in a movie and him not being the charismatic one.
I think he's playing it is that he's got this crisis of conscience. But the problem with me is that in the script, it's too late. He's already irredeemable. By the time we meet him, he's irredeemable. And the thing that redeems him is that this time he actually loves the girl, so he can't go through with it.
And here's my issue is, I feel like, they were playing, in the same way that the sister is kind of foreshadowed. Yeah, she's evil. It sets up this, he's a conflicted character, and this time he's falling for it. Except that while watching the movie, I can't really point to the part where things change. And it's supposed to be a key part of the emotional arc of he's very repentant, A, of what he's done in the past, and B, that the cycle has been broken emotionally, where he's like, this time I'm emotionally invested. But if you watch the movie, I can't go here he's not emotionally invested, and then over here he is emotionally invested, and in this part he's kind of in between. It just kind of gets played at the same level until the cards are on the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I kind of felt like he was being a little bit led by Jessica Chastain, but that certainly doesn't mean that he wasn't complicit in all of the evil.
No.
What's interesting to me is the pluses and minuses of the movies. There's absolutely gorgeous production design, absolutely lavish production design. Really like what you'd expect from Guillermo, but the story doesn't seem to reflect it or need it as much. In a way, the movie is more reliant on the look than ever before. In the past, with The Devil's Backbone, with Pan's Labyrinth, there was even with Blade 2, with the momentum of what was happening, there was enough going on that the lavish production helped the movie, but it wasn't the star of the movie because the movie itself was too busy telling a story. In this case, the beautiful stuff is there because the movie is moving slow enough that it needs to give you shit to look at. It's pretty stuff to look at, but the other thing is this decision, which when I first heard it, I thought was really good news, that he decided to make this a hard R horror movie, right? I don't know that it needs to be. I think that he probably, this movie tanked really huge, right? Further evidence to why he can't make this H.P. Lovecraft movie, right?
That's too bad, yeah.
So draw back the violence just slightly, and that's basically all that it would take, I think, to get this to a more PG level, which would give you a wider audience.
There's literally 2 scenes you could change the editing of and have it drop right down to PG-13.
Yeah, and but I one hand again, I like he's making a fucking horror movie, but so Hiddleston is going to be stabbed in the face, right? I get,
yeah,
and the story is dark. There's an incestuous angle. There's murder, and we see a lot of tiresome PG movies. There's a really good chance that if he'd gone PG, I'd be sitting here saying, why didn't he just go full on and say R? But I will argue that hurt the returns on this movie. I think that more people would have seen it. It would have made more money. Guillermo would have more street cred as a result of this movie. I've heard some people, friends of mine, that are just absolutely brutal to the movie. I don't think it's a catastrophe, but I think it's very weak in the catalog of Guillermo del Toro, considering how hands-on he was in this. He co-wrote the screenplay, It works enough that it's not terrible, but by Guillermo del Toro standards, I'm hoping this is his Lady Killers. Okay? My Coen brothers, who I'm big fans of, made a movie with Tom Hanks called The Lady Killers, which is okay. But in their canon of films, it's just disappointing. It's just disappointing. And he's late enough in his career that this isn't Blade 2. This isn't Mimic where the studio's fucking with him. This is like Guillermo doing
He had creative
exactly
control over
the
this.
movie that
Yeah.
he wanted to make. And I'm surprised that it's not the movie that I wanted to see as much. Now, I think I'm being more severe. I keep on I hear these words come out of my mouth, and I'm like, holy shit, Larry.
Well, last time when we had our first podcast, I did a real quick plug for my 2015 movie review video, and we had, me and my friend Gray Murfield, we had two. We have like a short 8-minute, these are our top 10, and then we have like a 2.5 hour, I don't know what we cut it down to, but probably still multiple hour, like just discussion of almost every movie we've seen, which was almost every movie of 2015. And the biggest thing that we spent time talking on was Crimson Peak.
Right.
I'm coming at it from the other direction where I feel guilty because I'm the friend that not hates it, but like I'm the one that's not as up on it. I'm actually surprised how much we were in tune with this so far. Yeah. But because as you were saying, the production design and any of the design is really good. There's really, really solid coloring choices and interesting coloring choices done throughout this movie.
I like that the house is sinking, literally sinking into the ground.
One thing that's actually really cool is there's one singular exception to this. Every time something is red, it's something that you would expect to be menacing, but B, something that's actually good. I guess something we haven't mentioned is that the ghosts in this movie are good guys, or at least neutral entities. They are not the horror element. They're just very intimidating to look at. But they are blood red. But they are, more or less
warning her.
Yeah, they're warning her. And same with the mansion. Like it's like I almost wish they delved into the house having being a character in and of itself a little bit harder. But there is a part towards the end where the house, it's sinking. It's blood red. Like sinks sometimes spew out the clay that looks like blood, and it's supposed to feel very menacing. But the house as a whole works to help our main character. It's cool to look at, but I don't know. I just can't get invested in the story the way I should for a movie like this.
Well, the ghosts, I think, are another one of the things that I would catalog as both a plus and a minus to the movie. I think they look fucking amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love the way the ghosts look, but their service to the plot, like you say, is to basically warn her or point her in the direction of the next clue, which serves A, to take the scare away from the ghost, and B, to take the effectiveness away from the main character. Mia Wasikowska, again, maybe it's more of a character thing than a performance. The story is told to her. She doesn't really do a lot active to solve it. She walks slowly down dark corridors, and then a ghost goes boo, and she finds the next clue. But everything, it's a path laid out for her. It's not really discovery.
And I feel like that as an audience member. There's the thing, it probably isn't a George R. R. Martin invention, but he's who I associate it with. This 3-step reveal of like you very subtly hint to something way early on, and then you kind of nod at something. You're like, oh, a key, that's weird. And then you're like, a locked door, and then you like flat out give the reveal of like, oh, the key that my dad left me in his inheritance. It unlocks the door. Except that I feel like this movie sometimes has 4-step discoveries, where you're like, okay, she's probably bad. Oh yeah, they're probably bad. Ah, they're killing people.
Definitely
oh,
bad.
Good, she's listening to an audio message explaining how they're killing people.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was stupid and didn't realize that. Yeah. And again, like I'm sounding more angry. Like I'm not angry at this movie. I don't hate the movie. It's just it should be great, and it's only pretty good.
The thing is like, it's as good as it looks, and the script does, in an A, B, and C sort of fashion, work. I just expect more from Guillermo. The one plot element that when I walked away from it both times, because I watched it twice now, I just couldn't choke down, and that I can't really resolve, like how anybody missed it or why it's there. And again, it's another choice. Even if you want to make it an R-rated movie, early in the first act of the movie, the main character's father is killed in a
borderline comedic fashion. What are you doing here?
His head is smashed into a sink repeatedly. It splits open. The corner of the sink actually shatters and breaks off. Okay. Depending on my mental well-being and my physical well-being, I will weigh, say, between 260 and 280 pounds at any given time. And there's no fucking way I could do that to a human being. So when the reveal comes around later in the movie and they turn the angle up and we see that the killer is Jessica Chastain, I don't believe it.
I didn't believe that it was Tom Hiddleston. I wouldn't even believe, like you said, that it was a hired goon.
It would have to be some sort of supernaturally strong person.
The Mountain from Game of Thrones. He's known to do that.
Yeah, Holdor or something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it seems like an easy fix too. His throat could have been cut, right?
He was in a shaving place.
He was there shaving his face. It seemed like they were setting that up. It was like they did this crazy, ultra-violent, over-the-top kill, and that was it looked cool, but at the same time, it actually hurt the story that you were telling. I think that, like, she's a vicious character, absolutely, but she would be stealthy and brutal. I actually believe her more to cut this guy's throat than to, like, physically ram his skull into the sink.
And it's like you said, it's supposed to be a fake out. Like, I'm really certain the idea is it'll be a physically brutal murdering, so you think that it's the male.
Yeah.
But they're both Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain are about physically equal. I think if
Chastain
they were,
could take him in a fight.
probably, like, if they were in a fight to the death, I'd probably vote for Jessica Chastain. I honestly, and this is kind of just the creative in me, like, ooh, if I was doing this movie, I would have maybe cut out the entire first segment in America and just started it there going
She
in
arrives
Crimson
at
Peak.
Crimson Peak
Yeah.
with her new husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, that takes half an hour out of the movie. But I guess they wanted to involve Charlie Hunnam. We've got this far and we haven't even mentioned Charlie Hunnam, which sort of explains how little he has to do with the story.
Well, he was busy starting a biker gang, I think, in America.
I don't know. I think I've been pretty labored on this. It's not a terrible movie. In fact, it's probably a good movie. And yet, here I sit disappointed.
Good evening. Civilized towns, you look a man direct in the face when you talk to him.
This isn't comfortable.
It's not supposed to be.
There's a situation. Serious.
Mrs. O'Dwyer was abducted.
She is my everything, and those savages have got her. God knows what they're doing to her, and every second that we delay.
You know who did this? They don't have a name. How many of them do you think there are?
It won't matter. You have no chance against any number of them.
I'm coming with you.
No, I need you here.
And this is what the backup's for, to help an emergency, not stay back. I'm coming.
We're making a 5-day journey in 3 days, riding along and sleeping the bare minimum.
I don't know what's west of here. No cattle trail or anything else goes in that direction.
If our horses die before we get there, or we go into hostile territory, weak and foggy with exhaustion, we won't rescue anybody.
Don't be scared. I am a friend.
So here, listen, this is where I'm going to tip my hand somewhat early, okay?
Okay.
Last year, Kurt Russell was in 2 Westerns.
And
one of them was The Hateful Eight, directed by Quentin Tarantino, 3-hour ultra-bloody Western. And the other better one is Bone Tomahawk.
So you also weren't a huge fan of Hateful Eight.
It's not that I mean, like, Hateful Eight's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, well, when we get to other historic horrors again.
Exactly. I don't dislike Hateful Eight. I think Bone Tomahawk is a better movie. I think it's a better movie across the board. I think it's a better screenplay. I think even though, you know, they got classic cinematographer and, you know, this classic music score for Hateful Eight, I think it feels more authentically a Western. And most importantly for genre fans, I think it's fucking terrifying.
I think it was maybe remakes. There was a recent episode where you were talking about movies that pretend like they're a PG horror and then go hard R.
Right.
This is that movie of these lists. Like, this movie, the very beginning, it almost, like, I almost question, because, like I mentioned before, I've watched almost every 2015 movie.
Right.
And I'd almost question, like, did this actually come out last year? Because they were doing, like, very traditional, like, cutaways for the first little bit of anytime something gory would have happened. You just cut away and it's like,
I don't know when it was shot, but it was definitely released just last year. So.
Yeah. I mean, it had to be shot. As I was going to say, I almost interrupted you during your introduction. Kurt Russell has the Hateful Eight mustache still, so I assume that they were shot
back to
fairly soon. Like, yeah, he got off the set of Hateful Eight and just walked over across the studio to Bone Tomahawk, where it wasn't snowing,
I'm in
I guess.
cowboy mode.
Yeah, exactly. Quick, you have me in 2 hours in cowboy mode, and then I'm done for the day. It like cuts away very almost in a cheesy way, like it's scared of blood. It's really cool, and then towards the end of the movie, Jesus, that's insanity.
Are you familiar with a classic John Ford / John Wayne Western called The Searchers?
No, I am not.
It's very similar in premise, as in there's a family member who is kidnapped by natives, and they go on a long quest to try and return them.
But remember, this time it's not natives.
Yeah.
It's troglodytes. Real natives would never do that.
That's what I'm saying. This is the horror movie version of The Searchers, is what I was getting to. And they take pains to try and tell us that this group of, I will call them monsters. Like, to call them native people or tribal or whatever, they're
like,
absolutely awful.
This is the definition of savage.
Yeah, like monstrous cave creatures. They almost take on a supernatural quality. And they even have other Native American characters in the movie when they talk about them who are just like, no, those aren't even people. They I can tell you where they live, but I'm not going anywhere near there. And if you go anywhere near there, they will fucking kill you. And the advice they're given that they don't heed is pretty correct in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and again, as audience members, we're watching this and we're like, well, they like cut away during all the kills, so it can't be that bad. Like, our main characters are safe, right? Yeah. And boy, do they flip that on its head.
Well, basically, we have a couple of cowboys who are doing bad business. It opens with a guy getting his throat cut, as waking up to having his own throat being slit. It sort of sets the tone that we're getting to in the movie. They are being pursued, and they end up desecrating this burial ground. One of them is killed by some arrows. The other gets away, and a few days later washes up in this small town. The small town has a sheriff who is Kurt Russell, and the sort of somewhat retired but, still sparky sheriff's deputy kind of Richard... man, I'm having trouble with names here today. Richard Jenkins, who's an actor I just love. I spent most of the movie just living in fear for that character because I love that character so much. Kurt Russell has to shoot while arresting this rapscallion. Calls in the doctor, who happens to be a woman who's married to a friend of his, to look after him. And when he goes home and comes back to see how things have resolved in the morning, finds out that the doctor has been kidnapped, that everybody that was basically there attending him have suddenly vanished. And they saddle up the horses and they set out in pursuit. Joining them on the band, Patrick Wilson, whose wife is missing, and this sort of strange dandy character played by Matthew Fox of Lost fame, who's an actor I just can't put my finger on. Sometimes I really like him, sometimes I think he's pushing it way too hard. In this case, I actually really think he's got a juicy character that he sinks his teeth in.
He was very enjoyable in this movie, yeah.
So basically what happens is a quest movie. A lot of the movie is them getting to this place. And once they get to this place, it becomes like a really grueling, almost torture porn movie.
Well, there's both, naked people and torture at one part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's basically the premise. We got to get these people back from these evil, savage hill folk.
Yeah.
And off we go. It's like Hills Have Eyes by way of Tombstone, I guess.
The way over there Hills Have Eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, knowing what we know now at the end of the movie about the troglodytes, I would be in horror for the rest of the village, except that, spoilers, by the end of it, they're all dead. But the fact that they came out all the way to the village, again, knowing what we know now, if I was, like the Native American was, if I knew that and I was like, oh, they've come here to take people, I would probably just leave the town. I'd be like, you know what, just leave your wife and loved ones. We're moving this whole town like 4 days south or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that they've managed to live so relatively close to them and not realize it. But that is because they are very small, and basically only the men seem to matter in this culture. In fact, in one of the movie's most horrifying revelations, we see that the women are basically bound, laying on ropes. Their limbs are amputated, and they're all just pregnant.
Oh, that's another thing about these people, is they're straight up cannibals. I assume that they just cut off, once the legs are big enough to eat, they just cut them off for food.
Yeah, like, Jesus, these villains are absolutely appalling. And the movie, it takes that nice sort of Western beat in that it starts off big, action sequence, gets you into the world, and then it sort of hunkers down on the porch for a little while, and it lets you get to know all of these characters. So as they ride out, I don't really like the Matthew Fox character. He seems like kind of a dick, but he's an interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
I like the forthrightness of the Kurt Russell character in that, you know, he's kind of a shoot first, ask questions later type of guy, but
absolutely,
he gets the job done. He kind of can respect that. And like I said, I just love Richard Jenkins as this old fart who shouldn't be up on the horse at all, but
he insisted.
He will do anything for the sheriff. He's like...
He's so lovable,
yeah. You just love him right away, which is why I flagged him for death.
Like, even before we get to the more horrific parts towards the end, and even after we've recovered from the horrific parts at the beginning, he just feels like a little too glimmer of hope for this world.
Yeah. And then we have Patrick Wilson, who suffered a terrible leg injury that we've never been really clear on, but the journey actually aggravates it, and there's a rather horrifying field operation that they do on his leg. All the little details, you can tell that this writer-director definitely, you know, loves this period and is making the kind of movie that he's probably been chewing over for a long time. You know, like Bone Tomahawk isn't a movie you just get to make. You know, he probably had this cooking for a long time, and I'm glad to see it see fruition. I think that the most dramatic thing to talk about in the movie, and what anybody who walks away from it, will be the last 20 minutes. And this is an over 2-hour movie. It's not all this, but it's hard not to mention. Yeah. The level of violence that we are subjected to. Like, I talked about The Hateful Eight, which is an incredibly bloody movie, but it's basically like a Disney movie by contrast.
I don't know if I'd go that far. There's some parts of Hateful Eight that make me very empathetically scream in my chair, but definitely, I guess, yeah, by comparison, some of the stuff that happens at the end of this movie is like, it belongs in a Saw movie, and even then it would probably overshadow the rest of the deaths.
But it seems weirdly justified in this world, right?
I don't... The thing that kind of grabbed me... Are we going to say the main thing?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. They strip a guy naked, hang him upside down, scalp him alive in front of his people, hang him upside down, and then...
bisect him from the groin down.
The worst way to get cut in half.
Yeah. And they do it in front of everybody.
Yes.
So, like, everybody's in their cages. They know that their turn is going to be coming up here. This guy's screaming. They're talking to him, trying fruitlessly to comfort him and telling him to be brave. And it's simultaneously a torture scene and a psychological torture scene.
Yes.
And it, like, seriously, if anybody's, like, got a problem with, like, really brutal violence... there's no way I can soft shoe it. It's one of the most incredibly violent sequences I can just pull out of the top of my head. Short of like Romero's Day of the Dead, like it is incredibly violent, and it doesn't become cartoon. It's not zombie. This is a real guy who we know, who's friends with Kurt Russell, who dies this absolutely miserable death. And the other thing about it too is like, it's so mechanical. Like, these guys are cannibals, and they, like, cut him, they bisect him, from the groin down, and then all of his guts fall out, and I'm like, oh, yeah, if you're a cannibal, splitting a person in half and having all the unedible parts just float out, that's probably very practical for you. That's how they treat it. It's like, oh, yeah, this is, like, it sucks that they scalped him, and that was pretty jerkish of them, but it feels like, yeah, it's the emotionlessness and the mechanics of it on their part, packed with their friends having to watch. That just is like a 1-2 punch. It's real hard to take. You would think if they're making it this painful on the guy, it's because they're sadistic and enjoying it. But they don't even seem to be enjoying it. It's just how they do business. Right. Fuck. Matthew Fox's character has sort of an interesting dead end. We're going into spoilers here, but like I said, he's kind of this wealthy, well-educated man who sort of snubs his nose down at everybody. He feels like he's cleaner, brighter, and better than everyone else. He says as much in the movie. And he says as much in the movie, which is another reason to kind of not like his character. But the interesting thing is that he didn't have to go on this quest. He just felt, because he involved himself, because he happened to be in the bar when the shooting took place, and he said that he would walk the lady doctor home, or whatever it was, that he felt that he'd involved himself. Oh, he retrieved the doctor. That's right. So somehow that made it his fault that she got kidnapped. the math there is completely wrong, right?
It feels like he's connected just enough that, like, if he stayed at town and it was like, oh yeah, they all got eaten by the troglodyte cannibal, it would bother him, even though he pretends like it wouldn't.
And that sort of makes him likable. But it's interesting because when they finally get assaulted for the first time, they finally get close enough to the territory, he takes a significant wound, but I don't think a mortal wound.
No,
but with that wound, he says, that's it, you guys, you go ahead. I'm done. And he sets about this plan. Give me some dynamite, give me some bullets, I'll buy you some time. And you're expecting this scene that you've seen in a lot of Western movies or a lot of war movies where the wounded soldier makes a grand exit by, sacrificing himself to save others and get rid of the bad guys. And he gets one of them.
Yeah.
It's really blunted. He doesn't get that heroic moment. We're set up for it. We don't get it.
And if I'm remembering the movie properly, we don't even see it for him, do we? Like, the main characters just hear his gunshot or something?
We see him get a round off, and we see the thing flying through the air, and I believe it cuts right before you hear the thwack.
Yeah.
But he's out.
Yeah.
But it's just a lot of things you don't expect. The walking wounded Patrick Wilson character just seems like he's this dead weight on the group. All he's going to do is slow them down and not be effective and get killed, right?
And several times in the movie, they tell him, they're like, hey, man, if you went home, no one would blame you.
Yeah, but we're trying to rescue your wife. Yeah. Like, that's what we're here to do, and you're actively slowing the rescue of your wife. And it finally gets to the point where they do have to leave him behind temporarily. And that ends up being sort of their saving grace because he can come in and save the day. I think that the only sort of point in the screenplay where I went like, I guess I don't question it, it just didn't seem like a logical, intuitive leap, is that these evil creatures have this bone thing in their throat that they kind of can whistle through to sort of acknowledge each other when they're approaching.
Mm-hmm.
And they've heard this sound throughout the movie. We've heard it long before we've seen them, that we've associated them. It's sort of this evil's version of chi-chi-chi, right?
Yeah.
You hear that sound, you know they're coming. And it's been throughout the movie. They seeded it really well. But Patrick Wilson, upon killing one of them, actually removes this plug from the throat and blows through it like he's going to communicate to a raptor.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As a reference to Jurassic Park 3. Now, that becomes handy, so as he's approaching the bad, hole where his friends are being held captive, he can blow that and people will think it's a friendly approaching, or when they come around the corner, they're not armed, so he can get the drop on them. I get it as a narrative sort of device, but I don't get how that character sees the bulge in his throat and says, this is a whistle that they use to communicate.
Didn't he watch one of the guys use it or something? Like, I don't know. I feel like...
I didn't see the aha moment. It doesn't mean I didn't miss it.
100%. No, I don't... Yeah, I as an audience member, pieced together what he should have done, like, a little bit like, cut out the whistle thingy.
Yeah. And you want him to go save them at this point.
Yeah.
So you're just on board. But it's the one little thing in the screenplay that kind of made me go, well... Just the idea of putting that in your mouth is horrifying anyway. He cut it out of the dude's throat. And now he's blowing through.
For me, I have a slightly bigger, like a more broad strokes issue will kind of bring back like Crimson Peak, where it's like, I don't hate this movie, I don't like hate this thing, but I feel like the whole trek there could have been trimmed down a little bit. In general, I feel like it's one step, maybe not one step, but like there's like 80% learning about the characters and then 20% travel, and it doesn't feel quite like a well-paced journey to me. Like the last 20 minutes definitely are quite the roller coaster, but there's a lot of traveling in the desert, and not every discussion indicates to me, not every discussion made me go away going like, I know more about these people now, and not quite every moment was an endearing, necessary moment, I thought. I'm not sure which one specifically I cut, but I feel like this movie could have been like 20 minutes shorter to its benefit.
I like the little details throughout the movie. We're talking about a different Western. We'll go back to the Coen brothers again. They did a remake of True Grit.
Oh, yeah.
And there's that scene where Jeff Bridges is laying the whip around the campfire, the rope around the campfire, because he believes that will keep snakes away.
Yeah.
it's just one of these small details that it's kind of endearing. And Bone Tomahawk has a lot of those small details, but usually they'll find a way to creep up and incorporate themselves into the script. What I like about this long journey that you're talking about, is that it's sort of part of the standard of the Western piece, is that they go on this epic journey. They don't just ride across a field and go fight the bad guys.
I wouldn't want that either.
They have to go on a journey, and they become closer, and we become closer with them through the journey. So that when the worm turns and when the knives come out, we care. Even though we didn't like Matthew Fox's character, when he dies, I was like, oh, shit. Right? And when we see that dude get brutalized in front of everybody else, it's horrifying for him and for everyone in the room. You know, by the time, you know, Richard Jenkins and Patrick Wilson hobble away from that cave and they hear those distant gunshots, I am so thrilled that these two at least got out of the situation, but it's kind of a haunting way to leave it with the Kurt Russell character. We don't know what happened, but nothing good, right?
Yeah. Best case
scenario. And I just wonder if it would have been as impactful if we didn't have that middle hour.
And I'm absolutely not saying like, this should not have been a long journey. I'm saying it should not have been quite as long.
What you're right in saying is that basically action for the first half an hour, and then an hour of Western, and then action for the last half an hour. And that might structurally, admittedly, be a problem. Personally, I fucking loved it.
Is it true he can walk through doors?
I will not leave you.
They're afraid.
I have visions I cannot explain. Light explodes inside my head. Like an earthquake, ripping me apart, blinding my reason.
I've lost those I depend on most.
I never knew a sickness to be so eloquent. From their suffering, they shall repent. Forgive me. Look into my eyes. What do you see?
So every now and then I'll come across a movie on a shelf somewhere and like, hey, this is a really cool cast and an interesting premise. Why have I not heard of this? And usually it's a bad thing. Every now and then I'll get surprised. My wife and I reviewed a movie called Red Lights, which was one of these. Cillian Murphy, Robert De Niro, Sigourney Weaver.
I'm still most excited about Cillian Murphy.
Right. And all of these people were in it, and I was like, Toby Jones? Like, what the hell? And I'd never heard of it. Similarly, Black Plague shows up. And I think you could be, it's just like, well, this looks like some sort of cheap way to kill time between seasons of Game of Thrones. It's very...
They're straight up doing the Leprechaun thing of, like, clearly this was made after Game... Like, the cover for this movie, for the current prints, was made after Game of Thrones became a thing, because it has Lena Headey on a almost Iron Throne made out of bones with a giant sword, with a dress that I don't think she ever wears in the show, with the smug that I don't think she ever wears, smug smirk that I don't think she ever wears in the show.
But I would be forgiven for thinking, like you say, it's one of these knockoff movies, or they're just trying to make a quick buck. I don't think that's what it is once I look at it. It's obviously a European production, obviously an international cast, and they do a reasonable job, although it's a low budget, of convincing me of the period. Some of the people are cleaner and shinier than others. The movie's got this strange all over the place vibe. When we were talking about Crimson Peak, I was saying that they were things that were both simultaneously good and bad for the movie.
Mm-hmm.
This movie seemed to make interesting choices where there'd be scenes where it would seem to be calling for, just in the terms of the plot, some sex and violence that would be justifiable to show us within the story, and they don't. And then there's other scenes where they show us strangely explicit things, and they don't really seem to need to.
Yeah.
And it's just confusing. The basic story is Lena Headey is basically reigning over the territory of her husband, who is off at the wars, and she's trying to keep things going at home. She's unfortunately wearing a chastity belt. It's one of the first times I've seen chastity belt really used as a plot point in a major movie before.
That's not fair. Your Highness also had a chastity belt that was a plot point.
Yeah, I was talking about movies, not abortion.
Oh, thank you.
Dissed Your Highness.
No,
although
fair.
That could be in historic horrors too, I suppose.
You're right. We should have done that. Like, each time the characters keep not dying, and I want them to. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Black Plague.
She's financially her kingdom is financially unstable. There's a lot of people that would be helpful to her, but obviously want other things.
Very indebted to the local bishop.
Yeah, and this religious figure who she must report to. In typical movies sort of villainizing people of the cloth, he's been collecting all of these arts from the Kama Sutra and stuff like that. And in order to forgive her debt, or if she doesn't make good on the debt that's owed, she's going to have to do all these horrendous sex acts and defy the good name of her husband. In the meantime, they have a high-value prisoner that they believe that they can exchange for some currency to get her husband back and regain her status and her currency. So she's got all these balls in the air, all this shit that she's got to deal with, all this stress and all of these very real stakes. And it's not an uninteresting premise. But I've got this feeling the whole time I'm watching the movie, while it's not terrible, it's just not there. It's just not there.
100%.
I wish I could be sitting here saying, the reason it falls apart is this. And it's not any one thing. I think that the French prisoner they have is a little bit too Harlequin romance novel cover boy pretty. But that's a pretty sketchy complaint to have in a world where
the chastity belt's also really medieval, and the castle's also really it's almost par for the course. Like, I guess he does stick out as being a little bit more exaggerated than other elements of the show, but
considering he spends most of the movie as a prisoner being beaten and defiled, he always looks super sexy when he needs to.
Yeah, he does.
Wow.
My thing, I don't know that this is one thing that I think is wrong with the movie necessarily, but if I were to make one big change, I would remove all the horror elements of this and just have it be a drama.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the stuff that works a lot better. And if anything, the movie gets muddled as it tries to incorporate the supernatural elements and the horrific elements towards the last act. It just never really gelled with the things that I was a little bit more emotionally invested in. Like, is Lena Headey going to get the mortgage ready in time or what?
They don't pull the trigger on the horror. You're absolutely right. They set it up. They give us an origin. They give us a reason for this character to need to prevent this mysterious prisoner. As he shows up, this illness seems to show up with us. Her luck seems to get worse and worse upon his arrival. And we find out that, he's on a very specific course for revenge. And when that reveal happens, in order to justify all this terrible shit that's going on, especially if they're going to make us want to like him, and I think that they do in the end.
I feel like, that's the idea.
I don't know if they did it successfully, but I think we're supposed to. And we find that the origin story for why he wants to revenge, why all this violence has happened, why all this has taken place, his mother was basically sentenced to death by Lena Headey's husband in the most horrifying way possible, in a crowd full of people, because his wife had been unfaithful to him.
It was death by gang rape.
Yeah, he says basically a shilling to every man here who fucks my wife. And she is raped to death.
Yeah, this movie does.
Right? But they won't pull the trigger on that. They won't pull the trigger on that. They won't. Not that I want to see this woman gang raped to death, but they just show us that. But they just show the crowd closing on them. But earlier in this exact same movie, there's a whole sequence where they're trying to investigate all the people who had left the country to see who's carrying the plague, and they all these guys lifting up their balls to see if there's they have no problem showing very graphic things, but when the script calls for it, they won't do it. And especially if it's something, to do with the horror element of it, I feel like somebody blanched, somebody turned away, somebody flinched when they should not have. The sexual repression of the Lena Headey character, I think, is another one of those things where it's in the performance more than it's in the script.
Yeah.
Like when it's revealed that she has the chastity belt. I mean, it made sense. Like, I understood, okay, well, of course she has a chastity belt, and of course that's feeding into this, tension that she's going on. Her husband's been gone 40 years, and she's wearing this awful thing. But again, when she finally gets free of that chastity belt, and she
surprisingly easily,
and she cheats on her husband, which is this great sin that she could never do until she learned the truth of him, right? There you have, this freedom of sexuality. She's finally, making her own bold choice. Let's have the sex. Nope. We're not going to have the sex.
You see, I feel like we saw too much in that scene, because when she took off the chastity belt, my only thought was, how is she even going to the bathroom? Yeah. This must be the grossest thing in the world. And they're just like looking at each other, and even like the implication of it, I was like, ew.
For the record, you're absolutely right, but there's nothing not gross about this period of
yeah, no, to be fair,
I was really grossed out by the Bishop character.
Yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to be, but that was an element of the plot that definitely worked. Every time they cut back to him, the days are ticking away on this ticking clock, and he is sending her these pictures of these graphic sexual acts. Again, we see pictures of graphic sexual acts, but we don't really see any sex in them.
And it works as a threat for the first bit of the movie. Well, not the first bit, but like until the third act. Like, it definitely, the implication and the overhanging threat is there. You're like, oh, this is going to be her, but you're right, it never culminates into anything.
Yeah.
It also doesn't really culminate into a huge revenge thing either, because the horror kind of falls flat, so...
Basically, yeah, I think you might have nailed it earlier on. Maybe that was what the movie just needed. I think it wanted to be a sort of historical drama, and they decided to try and sell it as a hella dark, supernatural Game of Thrones-y sort of thing.
Well, it was made before Game of Thrones, but
that's
BBC,
how they're selling it.
Yeah.
That's
that type of thing, yeah.
In this day and age, there's always going to be a better movie to watch, I think, than Black Plague. I think that if you stumble upon it, you can just keep on going.
Unless you have to choose between this and Your Highness, then choose Black Plague.
Absolutely. Watch this twice before you watch Your Highness once. It's an interesting movie of this sort of period, though. I think that it looks good. They obviously shot it in authentic locations.
Yeah.
And the feel of it is almost there. But almost doesn't quite get me.
The one thing that it is a low production, sorry, not a low production value. It is a low budget movie, and I feel like they service themselves well by having it go towards the kind of set pieces. And even though, the people feel a little bit cleaner than they should at times, I think a bigger problem that I have just mentally with the movie while watching it is there's like 3 sets. Yeah. And the movie doesn't have a sense of space. Even like there's this thing where the husband's walking back from war to home, and it's like they kind of show him walking over the same hill like 5 times. And the bishop's place, she's like, I'm going to see the bishop, and then it just cuts to inside a room, which feels like it could have been another part of the castle we see. Yeah. And I don't want to rag on it for being low budget, but I feel like a couple of establishing shots or environment shots could have helped. Like on their way back to London when they're doing whatever, they should be like, oh, just film like this hill and this other castle, and like give this place a sense of space in the bigger world. It feels like it's all shot around this one keep that they had access to for a month.
And that's probably exactly the case.
Yeah.
There's also some sort of weird fairy tale logic to her husband returning at the exact moment.
Right.
That she's consummating her relationship with
him. If he had tripped once and like messed up his journey timing, she could have just been like, oh yeah, no, everything's cool.
Yeah. I will say that the stakes set up by the evil sex bishop guy held my attention enough that like I wanted to see how that would resolve. But it was one of those things. Well, I was reviewing it for the podcast, obviously, too. I dutifully sat it out to see that story point played out because I just didn't want... I think that the only thing grosser than having to, do some sort of sex act with somebody that you find physically repugnant is if that person is a high-ranking member of the church.
Right?
That is the one sequence of horror that this movie managed to keep.
I'm Beowulf.
Oh, here we go.
By the gods, it's good to see you.
What are we fighting here?
The troll. Weirdly enough, he has a name.
Grendel. I know he was wronged, but I will see Valhalla or that thing's head on a pole.
The troll broke down these doors with 20 Danish warriors sleeping inside. What gives 13 Geats better hope?
We won't be sleeping.
So, as I said in the introduction, Beowulf is one of the oldest stories that we are aware of in written language. It is so old that the guy who bothered to write it down didn't bother to attribute his name to it or anyone's. It is just a story that's been around for fucking ever. And as someone who was an English major, I find that by itself just kind of interesting. I sometimes ask, is Beowulf something that people are very interested in because it's a very, very old story? Or is Beowulf something that someone's interested in because it's a very, very interesting story?
The Shakespeare question.
Or is it both? I don't know. It is. For those who are uninitiated, it's a story of this king who kills a troll, or what they refer to as a troll, which is just like a giant, super strong person in this world. But upon seeing the troll's child cowering on a ledge, decides he can't bring himself to kill the child and spares the child. And this act of, quote, compassion ends up costing him dearly. But it's interesting in that we sort of feel a little bit of sympathy towards the king, in that we see the king's entire world falling apart. We see him losing his people to different religions. We see him losing his power and authority, and we see him helpless. And it's all because of an act of compassion. So we can feel sorry for him. But we can also feel sorry for a little boy who went down to the beach to see his father's corpse and tried to drag the corpse home to the cave but couldn't. So instead just had to cut off his dad's head and take the head back to the cave, where he would grow up alone and become another monster just like his dad, right? So in this collision course between those two figures, the creature wants revenge on this king and starts, causing damage. They call for a great hero to come deal with this strife. Enter Gerard Butler as Beowulf. And Beowulf wants to challenge the monster to a duel, but the monster doesn't want to fight Beowulf because he ain't got no beef with Beowulf. So Beowulf either has to create one or, figure out how he's going to resolve this. That's the basic premise. It's a joint production of, I believe, Iceland and Canada.
Yes.
I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Do your research, Parsons.
I know the Canada part is correct.
Absolutely. I'm at least 50% right there.
Yeah. And I want to say the other, I'm pretty sure it's Iceland.
The cinematography is gorgeous, and they've got a nice international cast, which includes people from all over the world, and for some Canadian content, Sarah Polley. What do you think of Beowulf and Grendel?
Spoilers for the list. I love this movie. This movie came out of left field for me. I had not seen it before. Right. For being low budget, this movie really played its cards absolutely correctly, which is like the absolute number one thing that I feel like they paid attention to was the script. And they worked with what they had very well. I love that I sympathize, or at least understand, with almost everyone in this movie at any given time. Everyone's kind of doing things that make sense for them at that time and don't make me go like, oh, you're just the good guy or you're just a bad guy. Even Beowulf, a hero as old as time, like his deal is just kind of like, he's a warrior, but he's just kind of the best warrior. He's not a great warrior, like he's not some kind of legendary samurai in this world. He's just slightly better than everyone else. And then because they're all a bunch of hurly-burly men, they talk it up, and that's his whole backstory. I love that I love the characterization of Grendel. I love the character design of Grendel. I like the story of Grendel. Yeah. I like how all of that plays out. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is Grendel is bowling for skulls. Like, he has some skulls on a ridge, and he just has rocks, and he tosses at him, and he misses, and he gets frustrated, and he hits one, and he's so excited about getting a strike, and he like dances around and rolls around. And in that one scene, you're just like, oh, he's still mentally a child. Yeah. Like, you without any kind of words, without dialogue, without exposition, you get it entirely. I think like beginning to end, the movie justifies itself and justifies propelling itself forward. I think it ends in a fairly satisfying and logical way. love this movie upside down and right ways up, except for one little scene, which is why did, not to like just skip right into it, but like, why did Grendel have to rape that lady? I don't understand that. That felt very unnecessary.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily something that we couldn't expect Grendel to do because he's feral and he lived in the wilderness.
And that all makes sense. I'm just saying
but her reaction to it and the way she tells the story, like, basically one night Grendel showed up at my house and he raped me.
And he left. But he didn't kill me after.
And ever since then, he's been sort of my protector. So he did this one terrible thing. He sired a child with me, as we find out later on. And ever since then, we've been good. We had that one kind of unpleasant bit of business, and then after that, we were good. And that doesn't necessarily sit well, does it?
Especially since later on we find out that Grendel, it turns out, has a girlfriend or a wife or something. He could have sired a child with her, because the child is important. But he could have just been her protector, because it's already shown that Grendel understands who the people who killed his father are, and who the people that hunt him are, and then who the people that are just kind of caught in their wake are. And it makes just as much sense for everything that's been set up in this movie that he would see her. She even describes, like, if you have to have a rape, which I don't think you do, but like, even if he describes, like, oh yeah, well, other Danes would have just come here, raped me, and then killed me. Like, have that go down, and then Grendel comes in and is like, don't do that. I hate Danes, and I hate rape, and I'm a Grendel.
Yeah.
Like, that would have worked just as well for the narrative purposes of the movie, and then have the kid be with the Lady Grendel.
But if that's your criteria for, forgiveness, he didn't kill me after he raped me, then, obviously,
I see why Beowulf hightails it out of there afterwards.
It's a story of a different time, and I like...
For sure.
I mean, it's sticky, no matter how you slice it. I think Sarah Polley handles the material reasonably well.
Me too.
And she's sort of got this weird witchy vibe. She lives off on her own, and she...
Yeah.
I liked it, but it is an uncomfortable element. And if it's a trigger for you, I mean, I guess heads up when you're going into the movie.
Yeah, and I don't want to get super political and be like, nah, like, this can never happen in a movie whatsoever. I'm just saying, in this case, I don't feel like it necessarily flows with the rest of the movie, which I thought was fantastic.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I agree with you and disagree with you simultaneously, because I really, really like the movie, but it's not the script that necessarily lipped off for me. It's... First of all, the cinematography is ridiculous. You could watch the movie with the sound off, and you'd probably still understand the story more or less. And
they found the prettiest hills in Iceland, probably. And
it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's a gorgeous movie. And apparently, it was hell to shoot. It was very, very windy, and they had a lot of obstacles. But it shows up on screen. And what I like about it, for all of its classic origins and for all of the pomp and circumstance with which they present it, it's a fucking monster movie, and it's okay with being a monster movie. Like, and it's morally complex in that we can switch where our sides are. We're on everybody's side.
Yeah, I don't want to see anyone. I want everyone to go home happy. I want them to hug it out and be like, I'm sorry I killed your dad. I'm sorry I killed your men. I'm sorry that I'm Beowulf, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. And like, just go home happy. And of course it can't happen like that.
Arguably, the only real villainous thing that we see would be the Sea Witch who comes to avenge Grendel, and she's avenging her son's death.
No, but even at that point, like, oh, so is that supposed to be his mother? You're probably more steeped in this lore than I am.
That's how I interpreted it, at least in this version.
The trolls are awfully ugly, so I just thought it was his girlfriend. Yeah. But like, either way, like, in this, it's kind of just flat out violent act that she commits, but it's in vengeance. The same, and that's how this whole movie started.
But when she shows up too, I just love how fucking badass she is. Like, we barely had hints that she existed until this point, and then all of a sudden she shows up and she just fucking wolves out. It's pretty hardcore.
It's really great, yeah.
But I just like that it has all the trappings and sort of presentation of this sort of period Oscar piece. But at its heart, it's this, hard creature feature.
Right.
And I like that. That is what... As a genre appreciator, I go for it.
We were talking about how Black Plague doesn't necessarily handle its horror and supernatural stuff well. This handles its monster element very well and justifies it very well.
It doesn't feel a need to over-explain it. See, in this, just from this interpretation, and Zemeckis did a version, everybody sort of has their own sort of spin on it, seems, when they do the story. But in this version, the way I took it is that, the creatures, the supernatural elements, or the things that they call trolls, are people who've sort of mingled with the supernatural, right? Mm-hmm. So if a man, for instance, had sex with that sea hag, a troll would maybe be the offspring of that, right?
Yeah.
They don't tell us that. We have to sort of intuit that. But the characters seem to know that. It's sort of like when you're watching some sort of police procedural on TV and someone puts the evidence in a plastic bag and hands it to his buddy and says, yeah, take that down to the lab and ask them to run A, B, and C, right? Mm-hmm. They would never fucking have that conversation. Yeah. They would never have that conversation.
You just have the plastic bag and they know what to do with it.
They would just hand the guy the bag and the guy would do his fucking job, right? And we would understand, oh, they're collecting evidence, right? I don't like it when the movies feel the need to spoon feed us and over-explaining things. Like
Crimson Peak.
Crimson Peak. There is the flip side of this coin, though, which we'll be talking about next, where you can not explain enough. But I like that there's enough open doors and windows that you can see outside, but you got to focus on the story that's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it, for all the money or the expense and sort of effort that they went into making the movie, I think when it came out, it was a little bit disappointing, the reaction. I think it was well received critically, but it had a hard time finding an audience. And I myself, it took me a few years to catch up to it. It was a movie that I got around to. But once I got around to seeing it, I was like, everybody needs to watch this Grindle.
Yeah, I entirely understand how, like, if this movie came out in theaters at any given time, I can see how you'd look at it and be like, I'm gonna go see the other thing that's the actual movie to go see. But I feel like this movie is aged better than it probably. Not that it's ahead of its time in any kind of nuanced way, but it just as a standalone thing without expectations, I think it ages a lot better than it would as a movie that needs to make its money back in the theaters.
And as somebody who's said unkind things about Gerard Butler in the past, he's totally solid in this movie.
What have you said about Gerard Butler?
Whoa, them fighting's words. I reviewed Joel Schumacher's Phantom of the Opera.
Oh,
in which he
no!
played the Phantom, and
everything about that movie is good except for all the changes that they made. Just every time they took creative license, it was horrible. But aside from that, I thought the movie was fine, but we're not talking about that.
I think if you listen to my podcast, you'll find that I felt differently. Anyway,
no, that's fine.
Larry says, please see Beowulf and Grendel. Please don't see Phantom of the Opera.
I'm going to say watch both if you can, but definitely see Beowulf and Grendel.
Sergeant! Better come and see this! Stolitsky!
It's death, and it's waiting for us.
You want to kill me?
Deliver them from evil.
Welcome to Hell, play with Shakespeare.
Death Watch.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and too many maybe, because I can't remember where I heard this conversation, but in some podcast I heard these gentlemen talking about how World War I is not depicted enough in movies, and that maybe the reason is because there's just no way to portray it in any kind of glamour, that it was just a hellscape. It was just awful. And one of the many achievements of Death Watch is that I think that comes across. There's a scene very early in the movie where some guy who's walking toward a bunker actually steps into the abdomen of a corpse.
Yep.
His foot disappears into it, and he sort of steps out of it and shakes it off as if he just sunk into a puddle, like he just keeps moving.
Yeah.
Everybody is wet and muddy and sick and bleeding and miserable all of the time. And that's before the shit starts. And I think that for a low-budget movie, they definitely accomplished that. We have this troupe who, after a pretty bloody skirmish that right away flagged me, it made me think, is this going to be one of these movies where they're all dead? We're going to find out that they're dead because they're in a really bloody firefight. And you're like, oh, this looks awful, and people are dropping left and right. And they pull the few remaining members out of this fog, and this one guy who's been shot and looks like he's going to be paralyzed, and they find this system of trenches, and they figure they're just stumbled behind enemy lines. They better hold this position until they can get reinforced or figure out what to do. Problem is that this is an evil place that they have found. And that's the good, and the aesthetic and the performance are the good thing. I think that the evil place that they found is where the all stop happens. This place is bad. It's evil. There's blood in the ground. There's
barbed wire that
comes alive like snakes. There's false voices. People get lured out and away from places, and evil shit happens. But as to the what or the why of that evil shit, that shoe never drops. I never got that revelation where we find out that everybody's dead. I never got the revelation where we found out why all this was happening, and I never got the revelation of what this place was.
And they almost do it at the very end. They almost give you enough pieces with at least the German guy that they had captured was supernatural. The troop at some point captures a German soldier and keep him hostage, and then it turns out that he's supernatural. But it doesn't work to explain why things started going bad or what.
And again, in the hellscape that this movie is set in, it would seem like a relatively easy thing to argue, right? The war itself, there's been so much spilled blood, so much hatred, so much awfulness has happened that it's literally seeped into the ground and sullied this place. In the same way that a house or someplace or a graveyard can become stained or haunted by an evil presence, why not a bunker? Why not a system of trenches? But again, it's the frustrating lack of answers that sort of is the one sort of notch against the movie, because I think that it mostly works beyond that. There's this a little bit of a cock tease in that we don't get the ta-da payoff. There is no M. Night Shyamalan twist. There is no aha. There is no, this is the face of the evil. There is no why. A bunch of guys go to a place that's bad and they die.
Except for one. One gets
Except
away.
for one, but yes. But,
yeah.
And it is implied that this is going to go on and on and on. I like individual beats of the stories. I like individual performances, but that is my overall sort of crutch to it. I wouldn't steer someone away from it just because there's so few movies like this one, but I have a feeling that there's another better movie haunting this. Where do you land on Death Watch?
I never really landed for me. I also like the setting and the setup, and I also was a huge fan of the performances. This movie has Andy Serkis, who me and I'm sure everyone else really loves.
Himself.
Yep. Really, he's actually Caesar.
Caesar.
Yeah. That's how people know him now. No, I moment to moment, I never felt really compelled by this movie. It just feels like stuff happens. And maybe it's like you're saying, maybe that's it. It's the lack of answers just doesn't justify each individual moment enough for me. But yeah, there's some guys in a bunker and you're like, all right. And then some of them are mad for some reason and you're like, all right. And then some of them die for some reason and you're like, all right. And it never, we just got off the back of Beowulf and Grendel where there's such a domino effect of narrative, and this movie doesn't have one whatsoever. There's nothing kind of propelling the story forward. The story just happens. And
no moral complexity at all. Everything is bad.
Yeah, but there's also no pulse to it. Everything's just bad all the time, and it kind of ramps up in some way, but it doesn't ramp up in a natural way.
Right.
It's not like, first Freddy's gonna kind of kill the one person in their dream, and now we're all in the same dream, and now, except he's foiled our plan that we came up with, and there's no escalation emotionally, just the horror gets more horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, at any given moment, I couldn't predict, and I mean this in a bad way, not a good way. At any given moment, I couldn't predict what was going to happen next, and also I didn't care.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. We got Jamie Bell, who's this baby-faced kid who's sort of the blandly good character. He does freeze on the battlefield, but I forgive him for that.
Yeah.
His other soldiers may think he's a coward, but I totally understand turtling in a situation like that. And then Andy Serkis is sort of just representing everything bad.
He's Mr. White?
The military mindset, right? They're both strong performances, but there's, like I say, black and white, no gray to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in between kind of blurs together. It reminded me of the first time I watched the HBO series Band of Brothers, which I think is brilliant, by the way. But I had a hard time distinguishing people. the first time through. Like, it was a bunch of guys in military fatigues crawling around in snow and mud, right? So it took me the second or third viewing to get all of the corners of, oh, that was the same guy who... Yeah. But this is not a 10-hour miniseries, right? This is a 103-minute movie. And I was having the same problem. So consequently, that guy died. That guy died. You know? I've been really negative. There was a few genuinely strong moments, I'd like to say. I think that the dude who's been shot and paralyzed has one of the worst fates that I can think of in any of these 6 movies.
Really? Bone Tomahawk?
Well, he doesn't feel anything from the waist down, and he's been laying in this trench for days and days and days, and the rats have been eating him, and he doesn't notice it. His buddy's comforting him, trying to tell him that everything's going to be okay, and he notices that the blanket's moving, and he lifts the blanket, and the guy's half gone. And that is fucking horrible. That is fucking horrifying. For that scene alone, okay, no, that's a horror movie. Good points for that. That's awful. And it does have a few moments which are when Andy Serkis finally gets his comeuppance. So CG,
it's quite the comeuppance. Yeah,
it's very CG. Barbed wire is sort of poking through him and wrapping around him and everything like that. But the idea of it is awful, and you really. It's one of those obnoxious characters who you kind of wanted to see their comeuppance, but their comeuppance is so awful that you're like, okay, just die already.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I say that as a positive, right? I think that everybody who was involved in this movie is probably in the right line of work. I don't know if it was another pass on the script or just a slight bigger budget and it's sort of been all the way home. It made it to third base to me, but it didn't close the deal.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that this movie was over edited. That they actually had a lot more material, but then they trimmed it down for pacing and just somewhere in there, kind of like the Warcraft movie, just somewhere in there, little tidbits got lost that they didn't notice because they were so close to the material, but us would have related to a little bit more. We could have maybe separated the people a little bit more mentally with them traveling across the West and sharing their stories, but we didn't have that.
There's just great stuff here. Like I said, the environment is so rich. The terrible place that they're in. Finding a place that's haunted within the stakes of a battlefield is kind of interesting of itself.
Yeah.
I like that when they first encounter the bad guys, they're running towards them screaming in terror themselves, and they just get gunned down because the enemy is the enemy, right?
Yeah.
If they were able to have a conversation, maybe they would have been a few steps ahead of the game before people started dying, There's a bunch of almost here. So I think that the curiosity factor, if I will put it this way, if us talking about the movie makes you curious, think maybe I should check it out, then yes. But if this sounds just grim and awful to you, then yeah, well, it kind of is.
Yeah.
But grim and awful is the soup in which I swim, apparently. Yeah. I don't know. I just keep on going over that same thing. Moments worked, but overall, I think that I felt unsatisfied by the script.
Yeah, I'm just tepid on the movie. Yeah. Simple as that.
It can be this way for you always.
I curse thee into the depths of the bottomless pit, there to remain until the day of wrath.
Release me.
What were you expecting, my love? The devil?
All right, we're going to talk about The Devil's Rock, which comes out of New Zealand.
We're going all the way to the next World War.
Yes, here we go, flash forward. A couple of commandos, Kiwi commandos, hit the beach on this island trying to sniff out the activities of those evil Nazis. And one of the things I actually really like about this movie is that I get the feeling like this could take place in the world of Indiana Jones. The Nazis are really cartoon quality Nazis that you see in those when I see these Nazis, I don't think, oh my God, the world is terrible, humanity sucks, Auschwitz. None of those images fly through my brain. I just think cartoon villain. Right?
Yeah.
And, both of those things can have their place. But in The Devil's Rock, which has, as we were just discussing, the cover, which a bright red, be-titted demon on the cover of the DVD, it's playing in a different sort of genre.
Yes.
So yeah, it turns out those Nazis are doing bad things. They're experimenting with summoning a demon.
Indiana Jones should have stopped all of them.
That's right. And this demon can take the form of any female that is important to you and lure you in so you can be eaten. That's the demon's power, although it also has this terrible drawback in that it can't cross moving water. So the fact that they summoned it on an island was maybe the only smart thing that any character did in this movie.
Well, to be fair, the one British Nazi, he seems to be pretty apt at reading the owner's manual of the demon.
That's right. I think that the premise is ridiculous. Just hearing me talk about it, right? So they've got this lady demon held up. Most of the Nazis have been killed, and it's up to this commando and this one surviving Nazi to figure out what they're going to do about this creature. It's ridiculous. Like, the premise is completely silly and ridiculous, but it is treated straightly. It's treated earnestly. I think the acting in it overall is very strong, but I want to give special mention to the Nazi professor. I don't know if I can see his name here.
Christoph Waltz. No, I'm joking.
The mad scientist, the main Nazi that we encounter in this movie. I think the guy knows exactly the movie he's in and just fucking nails that performance. Because it is a tightrope act, because you have to take it seriously within the movie, while allowing the movie to be silly and fun and ridiculous. And much to my surprise, for a movie that has a titty demon on the cover, I had quite a bit of fun with The Devil's Rock. It's not amazing at all, but it's good enough for what it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to be heartbroken when this didn't win the Oscar of that year, but I think it's a perfectly entertaining movie. I usually get into quibbles with people that try and justify bad movies as quote-unquote entertaining.
Yeah.
I feel like a movie can be both. Like, it can be quality and entertaining and simple, and I think that's kind of what this is. This is not a bad but entertaining movie. This is just a purely entertaining movie.
Yeah. But I could see why someone would see that cover, this woman with painted bright red with horns on the side of red, and her arms just covering the nips, so we don't see it. There's going to be a sexy demon with her tits out for portions of this movie. But it's not really what the movie is about. It's how they sold the movie.
Absolutely. Right? It's funny because there is a part in the movie where her, as in her human form, which it's almost distracting because, the demon can take the form of any lady that's important to you, but they clearly got the same actress and put her in makeup to be the demon one, so it's like, but that's the same person when she looks like maybe the professor's love interest or the Nazi guy's love interest. Does the demon version also have the face of the Nazi's love interest? I digress. Anyway,
it's a small point as far as I'm concerned.
It's not a negative. It's just something I noticed. Anyways, there's a part where her in human form, she's like stripping, if I'm remembering it correctly, and I think the idea is you'd be like, oh yeah, let's see some titties, and I'm like, flash into a demon. I really want to see you in makeup.
I want to see the demon.
And she does.
Yeah. She's attractive enough, but I didn't really feel the exploitation of it. Like,
I feel like if someone looked exactly like my girlfriend but acted exactly like a demon, that would be enough to be like, I'm not drawn in. Maybe it's because I haven't been away during a war long enough. But yeah,
she's got this siren thing. She will lure you in, and she will take whatever feminine pose she can take to lure you in. Be it a long lost love, somebody that you've loved in the past that had died, or just...
I'm sure it could be like a sister or something, too.
Or a supermodel that you wanted to find.
Or that, yeah.
Especially in this really macho world of, soldiers, Nazis, men with guns, killing, right? In wartime, right?
Yeah.
Guys are going to, probably be even more susceptible. But I like how the movie kind of implies that almost no man could resist. There is some female form that would be able to seduce you, me, anybody, right?
if she
men
was
are
Jennifer
so
Connelly,
essentially, yeah.
even if I knew she was a demon, I'd be like, look, just eat me quickly. Stay in human form for like a couple seconds extra for me. I'll make it easy for you.
But I just think it doesn't say anything really proud about men. Yeah.
Well, I feel like maybe I'm giving the movie a little too much credit, but there are a lot of stories of during war times, during both wars, both sides would send their women over as spies, and their whole deal is like, yeah, go seduce this guy, meet him at a bar, and apparently it was very effective. And the movie actually begins with a guy like, oh yeah, I met this really hot nurse at like a club or whatever, old time club, at like a pub. And we should go. She has a friend, and like the two commandos, he's like trying to bring him over. And in my head, before I knew what the movie was going to fully be about, even having seen the cover, I'm not a bright person, I guess. I was like, no, don't go to that dinner. She's clearly a spy. And I feel like, yeah, this movie is kind of like a supernatural version of that.
But it's interesting that the most powerful figure in this whole movie, by far, in a genre that's traditionally male only, this war movie. The woman is the most powerful thing. Mm-hmm. And she's never really beaten. She's basically defeated because she was summoned on this island.
She's overcome, but she's not defeated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't think I'm making more of it than the movie does in a lot of ways. In the movie, she's like a naked woman chained, and at first she sort of plays it all coy. Oh, no. When he hears the shrieks of a female, he assumes the Nazis have been, taken a prisoner and been raping this woman or doing, which is, fair enough. They're fucking Nazis. Nazis suck, right?
Exactly.
But, so first he wants to be the heroic figure, but once the worm turns and he realizes, we've got a demon here, he basically has to make uncomfortable bedfellows with this Nazi to try and, quote, stop the demon. And wouldn't you know it, the Nazi fucking cheats and tries to trick him.
I can't even, like,
if you can't
you're
trust
joking,
a Nazi.
but like, there was a part of me that was hoping it would go the other way, where the Nazi's like, this is a demon. She demoned all the Nazi out of me. Yeah. I just want to get off this island. Yeah. And I was like, actually kind of, I'm giving this movie too much credit probably. I was kind of hoping that the British guy would he would turn on the Nazi preemptively. Like, he was like, nah, man, you're a Nazi. And the Nazi's like, no, I was not joking. I seriously need to have the pages around my neck. We'll both get out of this, trust me. Yeah. But I would there's this charm.
He wears around his neck that has a page from one of the magic books in it, which prevents the creature from harming him.
And then partway through the movie, he's like, hey, bro, I'm going to cast a spell to send her back to hell, but I need the page around my neck. And the guy's like, sure. And he he gives him a decoy. And part of me was hoping that the Nazi was just telling the truth because he was legitimately 100% more terrified of the demon than he was of Hitler or of Retribution or whatever.
This is not the world we're in. Like I said, this is Indiana Jones world. Not only is he a Nazi, but when he got his, first official fucking Nazi uniform and pendant, he's just just loves being evil. He just lives to do bad things, right? But he plays it really well. Like, he's a master manipulator. Right? Yeah, we got to work together to fight this demon that I summoned. Right? No, I want to sacrifice you to this demon so that I can get a better control on it, right? Obviously, surprise, surprise, it doesn't work out for the Nazis. But it's another one of those things where the evil it can't really be vanquished as far as we understand. Not that I expect or necessarily want Devil's Rock 2, 3, 4, but you could, if you want, imagine that demon is still sitting bored to tears on her island.
Occasionally getting Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. Every now and then some Nazi comes to check out the secret base and gets killed.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, thank God. Yeah.
I've been so bored. It's a Kiwi production. They didn't have a lot of money, but, obviously they had 3 sets, like you said. Yeah. They had a beach, they had a bunker.
They had a hill that they could composite a castle onto.
That's right, and that's what they needed. And again, when you don't have the money, you got to sort of use what you can. And what they have in New Zealand is amazing scenery, right? Your production value is right there. It's outside. It's in your backyard.
Yeah.
It's one of these movies that just is way better than you would expect it to be. You look at the cover, you read the back of it, and you feel like, I've seen this movie before, and it's lame. And you've seen variations of this movie before, but it isn't lame. It's all right. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, that's about the tenor I put. It's pretty good. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be saying you have to see The Devil's Rock. Drop what you're doing. You know.
I feel like unless you're going in unless you're going into like hate a movie that's not, again, like Oscar worthy, whatever that means, or what have you, it's a perfectly entertaining movie.
You want to watch a movie about a hot demon eating Nazis?
Yeah.
Because if you do, here it is.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming back to Rank and Review, Eric. I appreciate it. It was nice to look at some historic horror. It's been since episode 1. Like I said, here we are.
Bringing it full circle for the last episode of the series.
And I'd like to announce that this is officially the final episode. No. Anyway, Eric, I would be very excited to hear what was your least favorite of these 6 historical horror movies and why?
So as we were talking on the break, last time we talked, we were coming from a position of defending kind of what we thought. Yeah, we were defending a position, and that's where we were approaching it from. This time, I'm kind of going the entire opposite direction, and I'm just like, how do I feel about these movies? And you know how I feel? I feel like Death Watch is on the bottom. Yeah. I just don't feel like it's almost worse than the movies that I feel badly about. I don't feel anything about this movie. It doesn't pull me in enough. I don't feel like the highs are good enough to keep me interested in it. As far as it goes, if I had like this list of, oh, hey, Eric, you need to watch all of these again. Like, the episode got erased and it's 3 years later. We need to watch them all again and do it again. The one I'd be least interested in watching again is Death Watch. The one I'd be second least interested in watching at number 5 is Black Plague. Black Plague is an unsteady movie. The reason it's above Death Watch is because I found it more like the stuff that is interesting is more interesting than anything that I thought of for Death Watch. And like I said, I kind of want to just watch it for the dramatic purposes. Like, I just want to like have a de-horrored cut and just have like her struggling with, how do I deal with the bishop, and what's up with my husband? Is he dead? No one's heard of him for a while. And how do I handle a hostage situation? I've never done this before. Everyone wants to kill this guy. Like, I think that's inherently interesting. And even if the delivery is a little bit bungled, it's not a horrible movie. You know what else isn't a horrible movie? I'm actually going to go on a little bit. I thought this was going to be way more contentious than it was. But my number 4 is Crimson Peak. Right. And to talk about Crimson Peak, I don't want to talk about Crimson Peak. I actually want to talk about They Live for a brief moment if I can. Spoilers for They Live, but the premise is that there's this guy, it's this cult classic, there's this guy, and he discovers that there are certain glasses, and if you put them on, they reveal the world for how it truly is, and it is truly run by aliens who are trying to control us.
Correct.
And it's such a good, solid cult film, except that it was introduced to me by, I don't even want to call him a friend, but like this long acquaintance, like a brother of a friend of the family. And he is the most conspiracy nut person that I know. Like, any kind of ridiculous, the moon is actually a spaceship stuff, he legitimately believes and puts on people, and he's...
The world is flat and run by lizard people.
100, like, legitimately, I can't even stress, even in the back of their mind when you think of stuff like that, you're like, even the people that believe that don't believe that, but he believes that stuff religiously. And it ruined They Live for me, because I was watching it, I'm just like, this is just how he thinks it is. Like, he thinks this is some kind of documentary expose, and it just bothered me. As such, with Crimson Peak, everyone that I talked to, like, really loved Crimson Peak and made all the top 10. Like, you run with a better crowd than I do, I guess. Okay. But, like, for the internet, it made a lot of people's top 10 lists. There was a lot of expectations going to it. I respect Guillermo del Toro a lot. I had a lot of expectations coming from PT. But the movie just feels flat. And I can't get over that. Like, I just can't get over that internal bias of, like, no matter how well made it is, it doesn't pull me in the way it should. It does slightly more than Black Plague, but not the way that... So, like, this movie should be a masterpiece, given all of the creative control in the world. Having worked with Hideo Kojima, this, like, famous video game storyteller, craftsman. I feel like Guillermo del Toro should have pulled off something more interesting. He just didn't. Number 3, Devil's Rock. This movie is not a great movie. It's not a nuanced movie, but it is a very fun movie and a very legitimate movie, I would say. It's entertaining without being compromised. Like I was saying before, some people seem to associate entertainment with like, oh, well, a movie could just be dumb fun. And like a movie doesn't have to be dumb to be fun. It can just be fun. And that's what this movie is. Then I have Bone Tomahawk.
That middle hour took it out for you.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not the whole middle hour. It's like 10 minutes of it.
Right.
Like it just needed to be tightened a little bit, and it needed to move forward a little bit and have a little bit more, I guess, progression during that hour would have sold it to me. Instead of just finding out about the heroes, if there's just kind of like, it feels like a roller coaster almost. You're just like slowly going up the first thing,
clickety,
and like there's like a few too many clickities for me. And there it is. Solid cast, solid script, solid delivery, especially for the last 20 minutes, like you said. Just didn't fully hit it out of the park. And Beowulf and Grendel is just such a... It was my favorite discovery from this list. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the script. I'm a huge fan of the delivery of this story. I think they made use of what they had incredibly well. There's like literally one part, not that it's an otherwise flawless movie, but other than like the one, why did Grendel have to rape the Hill Witch? Aside from that, the movie just flows so well and is so cohesive and is so properly structured that I almost want to watch it again. Like I almost want to just like forget seeing the new Jason Bourne movie. I just want to like watch Beowulf and Grendel again because it's just such a well delivered story and journey.
It's one that a lot of people miss too. I think like we don't agree. It's not at the top of the list for me. But if it's a discovery for someone, if someone finds that movie because of this podcast, that makes me feel happy.
100%.
We almost went 0 for 6. It's kind of amusing where we line up and where we don't, to be honest. But I don't think we're going to have any serious scraps over this. I enjoyed watching this list. I don't think it's nothing worth getting in a twist over. I put The Black Plague at the bottom of the list. There's, I think I'll quote myself here when I say I feel like either on a direction or on a script level, somebody flinched. It was like they took us right to the line of where they were going to make this a historic horror movie, and then they flinched at the last second. And then you're right, it would have just been better served to have just been a straight drama than to have done so little service to the actual scary story that they were setting up. So almost, but not quite. Like I said, if not for that gross angle of her avoiding being raped by a religious official, that for some reason wanting to see that guy not get his just desserts is basically what made me get through the movie. I put Death Wash in 5th place. I love the setting. I think I like the movie just generally more than you did. I've also seen it twice. Obviously, I'm guessing you're working off of one viewing.
I don't want to watch it twice.
No,
that was my whole point.
I'm not saying watch it twice, but I do think that it helped having seen it a second time. It sunk into me. And I want a good movie, even a non-horror movie made in World War I, but a good horror movie set in World War I would be awesome to see. So until that movie comes, we'll just have to live with Death Watch to hold us over. Controversially low, considering what a fan I am of Guillermo. In 4th position, I'm putting Crimson Peak. I didn't mention it in the movie, but I think it's one of those sort of... It's emblematic of the things when I didn't like the movie. It was really loud. Peak scene, big spoiler moment. The two girls are having the ultimate knifey, stabby cat fight, the climactic battle of the movie. And Mia Wasikowska is given a zinger line before she smashes Jessica Chastain with the shovel. She said, "I heard you the first time." And it was one of the most Hollywood on-the-nose lines that I ever felt coming out of a Guillermo del Toro movie.
It did not feel empowering the way it was delivered, like it was supposed to feel empowering.
and it felt very modern, and it just felt out of sync. And that's how the movie feels to me. It looks good, the cast is good, but it seems just slightly out of sync. The words don't quite match the mouth, and it distracts everything else. But I'm never going to be too hard on Guillermo because it's decent. It's just not good by Guillermo standards. So we agree. In third position is The Devil's Rock. And I thought this might be the movie that I was apologizing for because it really is Titty Demon Eats Nazis. Like, it's profoundly stupid when you get down to it.
Premise, sure, but it's delivered fine.
But that's it. It's 86 minutes. It moves. It does the job as efficiently as it can, and considering the low budget, I think you get your money's worth. It's not something that you'd feel proud. Like I said, the cover of it is definitely selling the sex and the demon on the cover, and the movie has more to it than that. I understand why they would use it to sell it, but that makes the movie look, in a way, even more cheesy than it is. I'm not saying it's not cheesy, but it's not anywhere near as cheesy as the packaging would suggest. And then in second place, I put Beowulf and Grendel, for all the reasons we talked about. It was really nice for me to be on side with Gerard Butler because I've said mean things about him in the past. I think he's fine in the movie. I love the production value. I think it's a great story. You know, the English major in me was satiated. The monster movie fan in me was satiated. It's a good full course meal. And if you have not seen it, if you've been avoiding it for whatever reason, I invite you to check it out. It's not a slog. It's a really fun, energetic monster movie. I put Bone Tomahawk in first place because it blew my mind when I watched it. I didn't know what I was expecting. I knew it had a reputation, and I'd been told go in knowing as little as possible. So if you haven't seen Bone Tomahawk, I just fucked it up for you. But
I feel like these podcasts pretty explicitly begin. And honestly, some of the episodes I go through and you're like, we're going to watch this, this, and this. There are spoilers. And I'm like, nope. I need to
watch it first.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't do that, that's on you.
Yeah, that's on you. We do say spoilers right out the gate. I love the journey of the movie. I love that it's not a horror western. It's not a western horror. It is both of those things, right?
It's a horrific western.
And then it gets horror. And you're talking about sort of the stakes as we're slowly getting closer to the thing that's awful. You know something as awful is coming, and you know with every step of this journey they're getting closer to something awful. And as they're getting closer, for me, I just felt this dread for the characters. I realized I really like these guys, and there's no way all of them are going to live through this, and I don't want any of them to die. And I love that, you know?
You know what a great storytelling piece was having the husband with a broken leg. Because with that, you understand that they're not going to go in heroes with guns blazing. Yeah. This guy is a setback, and it can't end well with his broken leg. And it does a very good job of telegraphing without maybe foreshadowing foreshadowing without maybe telegraphing is a better way to put it. The ending, very solid, yeah.
The quest is literally hobbled.
Yeah.
And the person who's hobbled is the person who's most desperate to be moving fast.
If anything, I'm surprised they turned out as well as they did.
Well, like I said, I would have lost money that Richard Jenkins was going to live through that movie. I seriously was just like, it was one of those things where I almost wanted to skip to the end just because I would never do it. Because that, for me, if I'm watching a movie and I feel that inclination like that I need to skip to see what happens, I won't do it. But if I have that inclination, that means I'm into the movie and I'm liking the movie. And instead of feeling bored during that journey in the middle of Bone Tomahawk, that's what I was feeling. I was just like, oh no, you guys. Oh no. Oh no, you guys. And like I said, go ahead and watch Hateful Eight. I'm not saying that Hateful Eight is a bad movie, but as far as the movies that the westerns that Kurt Russell made last year, I think this is the better of the two.
You want to know the funny thing is before we went into this, I was kind of struggling with doing it was Devil's Rock and Crimson Peak.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, Crimson Peak. And I'm like, Crimson Peak is like the right answer, quote unquote. But I like Devil's Rock better, and then I bumped it up.
I think Devil's Rock knows what it is
100%.
more than Crimson Peak knows what it is.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't be proud of making Crimson Peak, but like if I made Devil's Rock, I wouldn't be like. I'd feel like the movie turned out perfectly. I
There's
think
more
maybe
production
Death Watch.
value in any two shots of Crimson Peak than there are in the entirety of Devil's Rock. But Devil's Rock knew that it was hot demon eats Nazis, whereas Crimson Peak seems to think it's basically a ghost movie, but it seems to be treating itself like this opulent, poised Oscar thing.
Yeah.
And it kind of takes some of the scares out of it. But I wouldn't steer someone away from it necessarily either.
Yeah, that's why it's in the middle of the list.
It is funny that both of us put the Devil's Rock ahead of Crimson Peak because I thought that was definitely going to be a Larry move. So we're on the same page. Is there anything that you would like to say to the kids on the internet out there listening?
Don't stop interneting.
You
keep the world running. I don't know if anyone that listens to this. I'm glad that podcasts like this exist. I enjoy being on it. I enjoy listening to it. I enjoy discovering new movies. And as a movie fanatic, there's always some that slip through the net.
Yeah.
Like I try and keep track of the movies that are going on, especially since like 2006. I've been pretty on top of it. But there's always something that slips through the net.
Oh, yeah.
And if this brought anything to you, let it be Beowulf and Grendel. Yeah. But honestly, thanks for supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening, and I hope you go watch a new movie because of this.
Don't internet too much, though, because you'll go blind. And that's it, and that is all. This episode is history. Let's say goodbye and put into the rearview mirror episode 85 of Rank and Review. And if you think I or Eric got this episode completely wrong, you can let me know. You just write me at rankandreview@gmail.com and say, Larry, you're full of shit. I would even welcome that negative feedback at this point. Anything you guys have to say, any ideas of themes for shows, or just feedback is always welcome. rankandreview@gmail.com. rankandreview@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll see you every other Wednesday for Rank and Review. Thanks, you guys.